2,000 years later, the fastest route across Europe is still a Roman road. These ancient highways are not just ruins, they are the active skeleton of a continent, hidden in plain sight beneath our modern streets and fields. By the end of this journey, you will see the map of Europe with entirely new eyes, recognizing the ghostly grid that dictates where we live and travel. How did engineers without engines or computers plot lines so straight they defy geography? And what forgotten material recipe gave their roads a near-eternal lifespan? The answers lie in a layered secret, a masterpiece of endurance built to outlast empires. What does it mean to walk on a road designed for eternity? Pull up a map on your phone anywhere in Western Europe, and you might be following a 2,000-year-old set of instructions. That small country lane in rural France, designated as a modern B road, runs arrow straight for miles, cutting across fields and over gentle hills with a stubborn disregard for the natural lay of the land. Your navigation system is simply acknowledging a reality older than nations. This is the ghost in the grid, the persistent logic of Roman engineering that was so effective, so fundamentally correct, that every civilization that came after simply built on top of it. The medieval farmer heading to market, the 18th century mail coach, and your car today all converge on the same narrow strip of land because the Romans decided that was the best way to go. They were the master planners of permanence, and their primary tool was a deceptively simple device called the Groma. Picture a cross mounted on a pole with plumb bobs hanging from each of its four arms. A surveyor, known as an agrimensor, would plant this in the ground and sight along the lines created by the dangling weights. By aligning one pair of plumb bobs with a distant marker, he could establish a perfectly straight sight line across any terrain. It was a process of incredible patience. Teams would work in relays, marking point after point across valleys and over hilltops, refusing to let the landscape dictate a single curve. This obsession with directness was not about arrogance, but about control and efficiency. A straight road is a predictable road. It shortens travel time for marching legions, speeds the flow of imperial messengers, and simplifies logistics for supply trains. The famous Fosse Way in Britain runs from Exeter to Lincoln, a slash across the country that for long stretches defines the modern border between counties. In Italy, the Via Appia, the queen of roads, still has sections where you can drive on the original stone paving, following that relentless straight line from Rome to the southern coast. Every time we take a shortcut or follow a highway that seems unnaturally direct, we are living inside a Roman blueprint. So here is a question to ponder on your next journey. How many of the turns you take, the roads you choose, the very layout of your town, were decided not by a modern engineer, but by a Roman surveyor squinting along a plumb line, drawing a forever line on a map that we have never dared to erase? That relentless straight line was only the beginning of the design. Think of a Roman road not as a simple path, but as a layered cake of stone and soil, where every single stratum had a precise, non-negotiable job to perform. The true genius, the reason these roads have endured for millennia, lies hidden in the darkness below our feet. Before a single stone was set for the surface, Roman engineers performed a radical act of excavation. They would dig a deep trench called the fossa, often as deep as a tall person, and they would not stop until their shovels hit a layer of earth that was completely unyielding. This was not merely making a hole. This was a surgical search for the continent's bedrock, a deliberate marriage between human intention and geological certainty. Upon this unshakable floor, they placed the first secret layer, the statumen. This was a thick bed of large, fist-sized stones, carefully packed together. Its purpose was brilliantly dual. First, it acted as a massive drain, allowing groundwater to channel away from the roadbed, preventing the softening mud that destroys ordinary paths. Second, it distributed the immense weight of armies, carts, and centuries of traffic down into the stable earth, like a stone net catching and dispersing pressure. The Roman architect Vitruvius, in his foundational work De Architectura, laid out these principles with clear authority. He wrote not just of construction, but of an understanding of load-bearing and hydrogeology that was centuries ahead of its time. This foundational logic is why, across Europe, archaeologists often find that the Roman roadbed itself is perfectly preserved, a fossilized ribbon of intent resting just beneath the plow line or modern asphalt. The surface might be gone, but the bones are still there, patiently waiting because the Romans built not for their own decade, but for a future they would never see. But a bed of loose stones would never hold a straight line under the weight of history. The true magic, the alchemy that transformed a trench into a timeless highway, happened in the next layer. Above the statumen, engineers would pour and pack a thick mixture that was far more than just rubble. This was the rudus, a deliberately engineered core of crushed stone, bound together with a revolutionary mortar. This mortar was not the simple lime paste used for centuries. Roman builders had discovered a secret ingredient, a fine, dusty ash harvested from the slopes of volcanoes near the Bay of Naples from a town called Pozzolanic. This was pozzolana. When mixed with lime and water, it triggered a silent chemical reaction, creating a cement that could harden not just in air, but even underwater. This was the same material that allowed them to build harbors in the sea and aqueducts across valleys. They were now pouring a version of submarine concrete into the heart of their roads. The rudus layer became a single, monolithic slab. It was not merely strong, it was coherent, binding the loose stones below into a unified mass and creating a perfectly level, rigid platform for the final paving stones. This innovation solved problems the engineers of Northern Europe had never even considered. In warmer climates, a simple dirt path might suffice, but in Gaul or Britannia, the ground freezes and thaws. Water seeps into cracks, expands as ice, and pushes everything apart in a process called frost heave. Tree roots seek moisture and pry stones loose. The Pozzolanic rudus layer was the ultimate defense. It was so dense and chemically fused that water could not penetrate it to freeze. Roots could not find a seam to exploit. It created a permanent, waterproof shell around the road's vulnerable heart. In many ways, this 2,000-year-old material rivals our modern concrete. While our Portland cement sets faster, Roman pozzolanic concrete has a legendary durability, often gaining strength over centuries as its slow chemical reactions continue. Every time a Roman road survives another harsh winter untouched, it is a testament to that volcanic ash mixed into its core, a recipe for eternity poured into a trench and forgotten, until we dig it up and wonder at its stubborn refusal to return to dust. Yet this masterpiece of engineering was still incomplete without its final, defining skin. The road's surface was not a crude scattering of rocks, but a carefully crafted mosaic designed for speed and permanence. On top of that solid, waterproof core, workers would lay down a bed of fine gravel and sand called the nucleus. Think of it as the perfect underlayment for a stone carpet, a final leveling layer that ensured every piece of the top surface would sit flush and true. And then came the crowning glory, the Summum Dorsum, the wearing course. This was the surface travelers actually saw and walked upon, and it was a work of art in its own right. Craftsmen would take blocks of incredibly hard stone, like basalt or flint, and shape them into interlocking polygons. These stones were not simply dropped into place. They were painstakingly fitted together, edge to edge, with a precision that feels almost impossible for hand tools. The joints were so tight that, as historical accounts note, you could not slip a knife blade between them. This created a seamless, monolithic expanse of stone that could withstand the relentless pounding of iron-rimmed wagon wheels and the nailed sandals of countless marching soldiers. Furthermore, this surface was not flat. It was subtly cambered, arched like the back of a very gentle turtle. This brilliant design meant that rainwater would not pool and erode the road, but would run quickly off the sides into deep drainage ditches that flanked every highway. You can still witness this perfection on a preserved stretch of the Via Appia Antiquar just outside Rome. There, the original basalt blocks, worn smooth and dark by 2 millennia of footsteps and cartwheels, still form that unmistakable, slightly rounded surface. It feels solid and alive underfoot, a testament to the Roman belief that every detail mattered. This obsessive attention to the traveler's experience is why their legions could move at astonishing speed, covering 25 miles a day or more over these smooth, reliable highways. It is also why, even when the stones are long gone, the raised, cambered shape of a Roman road's foundation often remains etched into the landscape, a ghostly ridge in a farmer's field that whispers of the perfect surface that once was. But that perfect, cambered stone surface was only half the story of a Roman road's relationship with water. Beneath that elegant geometry lay a hidden, active defense system. To understand its brilliance, we can look to a modern engineer who, while surveying the profile of a Roman road in northern England, made a quiet but profound discovery. Using precise laser levels, he mapped the subtle convex curve of the roadbed, the raised central spine the Romans called the agger. His measurements revealed this was not a crude mound, but a mathematically calculated arc engineered to a precise gradient. For every foot in width from the center crown to the edge, the road fell by a specific, consistent fraction of an inch. This gentle but relentless slope was a hydrological masterstroke. It meant that rainwater hitting the road would not soak in or pool, but would be instantly shepherded sideways, flowing with quiet efficiency into the deep parallel trenches that flanked every highway, the Fossae. These were not mere ditches, they were integral components of the road, carefully dug and maintained to carry water away from the vulnerable foundation. This system treated water not as a nuisance, but as a predictable force to be managed with respect and redirected with grace. It is a level of foresight that puts many of our own paved surfaces to shame. Where water often pools and cracks the asphalt in a cycle of decay, the Romans simply refused to accept. Yet, the true ingenuity was reserved for the moments when the road itself was the obstacle. Where a highway crossed a natural dip or a seasonal stream, Roman engineers did not simply build a bridge and hope for the best. At regular, strategic intervals, they integrated stone culverts right into the fabric of the road's foundation. These were not afterthoughts but planned arteries. Built from the same durable, tight-fitting stone as the surface, these tunnels were carefully angled to channel water underneath the roadbed, allowing the natural flow of the landscape to continue uninterrupted. This prevented water from ever backing up against the road's sides, eliminating the erosive pressure that can scour away soil and destabilize even the strongest wall. It was a philosophy of coexistence with the environment, not domination over it. They understood that to defeat a force like moving water, you must give it a path of least resistance that also serves your purpose. So we are left with a reflective and perhaps unsettling question for our own era of concrete and steel. With all our advanced materials and computer models, how much of our current infrastructure still fails to account for the simple, persistent power of water as intelligently as an engineer 2,000 years ago with a plumb line and a volcanic ash recipe did? Their roads survived because they were designed to collaborate with the world, not just conquer it. The straight line was more than a tool of efficiency, it was a statement of cosmic belief. To the Roman surveyor, the agrimensor, his work was a sacred geometry. He stood at the crossroads of earth and sky, tasked with imposing a divine order upon the wild and untamed landscape. His simple Groma, with its hanging plumb bobs, did more than plot a path from point A to point B. In the right hands, it became an instrument for aligning the human world with the celestial one. Major highways were often inaugurated with elaborate religious ceremonies, and their routes were sometimes chosen with a profound symbolism in mind. Take the Via Flaminia, the great northern road from Rome to the Adriatic coast. Scholars studying its trajectory have noted that its initial bearing as it leaves the city aligns almost perfectly with the sunrise on the summer solstice. This was likely no accident, for a culture that revered the sun god Sol and watched the heavens for signs. Laying a road in the light of the year's longest day was an act of consecration. It embedded the road, and by extension the empire it served, into the eternal cycles of the cosmos. Other theories suggest certain long, straight stretches were aligned with the rising or setting of key stars, like Sirius or the constellation of Orion, which held deep significance in Roman mythology and agriculture. This practice transformed infrastructure into ideology. A road aligned with a solstice sunrise was not merely a physical connector, it was a symbolic thread stitching the territory of Rome to the domain of the gods. Every legion that marched down it, every merchant who traveled its course, was unconsciously participating in a ritual of order, walking a path that had been blessed by the heavens themselves. This reveals the deepest layer of the Roman road's secret. Its legendary straightness served a dual purpose. Practically, it allowed for rapid military deployment and economic control. Spiritually, it manifested the Roman ideal of rectitudo, of moral and cosmic correctness. A crooked road was chaotic, a reflection of barbarian disorder. A straight road was rational, divine, and Roman. So when we look at those stubborn lines on the map that refuse to bend for river or hill, we are seeing more than a surveyor's stubbornness. We are witnessing the ghost of a philosophy, the belief that to build something eternal on earth, you must first borrow the unwavering logic of the sky. The road's permanence was therefore part of a grander design, an attempt to make the empire itself a permanent, ordered reflection of the universe. Buried beneath the soil of a northern British town, archaeologists unearthed a broken clay jar. Its shape and markings were unmistakable. It was an amphora from southern Spain, still carrying the faint, earthy scent of olive oil pressed over 1,000 miles away. This single fragment tells a story far bigger than trade. It is proof of a world connected, a testament to the Roman road not as a feat of engineering alone, but as the pulsating economic artery of an entire continent. Those straight, stone lines were the engine of the ancient world's first common market. For the first time in history, a farmer in Gaul could produce wine not just for his village, but with reasonable confidence that a merchant's cart could get it to a wealthy buyer in Rome or a frontier garrison in Germany before it spoiled. The roads standardized commerce itself. Their width was carefully regulated, often wide enough for two carts to pass comfortably. This was not a casual detail, it was a deliberate design for economic flow, preventing bottlenecks and ensuring goods and troops could move in both directions without delay. This physical network created a predictable, secure environment where the cost of doing business across vast distances plummeted. A provincial economy was no longer isolated. It was now an integrated piece of a single, sprawling system, its fate linked to the price of grain in Egypt or the demand for Spanish silver. The principle is hauntingly familiar. It is the same logic that, 2 millennia later, drives the European Union's single market, the removal of internal barriers to allow goods, people, and capital to flow freely. We are still chasing the economic unity that Roman roads first made physically possible, but goods were only half of the equation. Information was the empire's lifeblood, and for that, the Romans engineered a system of breathtaking speed and reliability, the Cursus Publicus. This was the state courier and transportation service, a network of way stations set at intervals of 1 day's travel. Here, official messengers carrying imperial decrees, military dispatches, or tax records could change horses or carts and continue at a gallop. A message could travel from the banks of the Rhine to Rome in a matter of weeks, a speed that would not be reliably matched again until the 19th century. This created an unprecedented nervous system for the ancient world, allowing the central government to administer provinces, respond to crises, and maintain a cohesive cultural identity. The flow of news, law, and currency along these stone channels bound the empire together with invisible threads of data. Today, the modern commercial corridors of Europe, the dense webs of motorways and rail lines linking industrial centers, often trace the ghostly paths of those first economic arteries. The road from Lyon to Paris, the highway through the Rhine Valley, these are not accidents of modern planning. They are the legacy of a 2,000-year-old choice, the recognition that the easiest, most logical route for moving an amphora of oil is also the easiest route for moving a container truck. The landscape itself remembers the flows of commerce, and the Roman surveyor, in drawing his straight line, was unknowingly drafting the blueprint for a unified Europe's economic heartbeat. The rhythmic thud of a century of soldiers marching in lockstep was a sound engineered into the stone. That uniform cadence, the ability to move 5,000 men as a single unit across a continent, was only possible because every footfall landed on a predictable, unyielding surface. This was the military secret that built an empire not with a secret weapon but with a secret pathway. Speed was the ultimate tactical advantage. While a local tribe might know the forest trails, their movement was hindered by mud, streams, and rough terrain. A Roman legion on its engineered highways could cover 20 miles in a day, fully loaded, and do it again tomorrow and the day after that. This transformed warfare. An enemy could not outrun news of their own rebellion because the messengers carrying that news moved on roads designed for haste. A legion could appear at a distant frontier with shocking suddenness, a strategic shockwave rolling along a stone channel. But these roads were not built in peaceful times for future use. They were forged in the very act of conquest, an army advancing with shovels as deliberately as with swords. As legions pushed into new territory, specialized military engineers marched at the front. They would immediately plot the route, and the soldiers behind them became the construction crew. This was a logistical masterpiece. They used local materials, quarrying stone from nearby hills, cutting timber from adjacent forests, following the standardized layered technique that made every road from Syria to Scotland recognizably Roman. The army literally paved its own way forward, leaving behind a permanent, fortified line of communication as it went. At intervals of exactly 1 day's march, they would establish fortified way stations, the mansions. These were not mere rest stops but secure hubs of control, complete with granaries, stables, and a small garrison. This created a repeating, rhythmic pattern of power across the landscape. A commander could move troops and supplies between these points with perfect reliability, turning a wild territory into a networked grid. The psychological impact was profound. For the conquered people, the road was not just a path, it was the permanent physical signature of Rome carved into their homeland. It demonstrated that the empire was not a passing raid, but a permanent alteration. The road was always there, a constant reminder of the legion's ability to return at speed. This system of control was so effective that it often dictated the shape of history long after the legions were gone. Many of the internal borders of modern European nations, the lines between counties and provinces, were first sketched by the reach of these military roads and the territories between the forts that guarded them. The landscape itself was branded, and that brand, etched in stone and strategic location, proved to be one of the most enduring legacies of all. Yet for all their cosmic alignment and military precision, these eternal stones hold a quieter, more human story within their layers. The road's immortality was purchased with lifetimes of fleeting, anonymous labor. Behind every mile of that perfect geometry stood not just brilliant architecture, but a vast, unseen army of hands. The actual work of moving mountains of earth and stone fell to the legions themselves, to enslaved populations, and to local communities conscripted into service. Recent archaeology has begun to listen to their whispers. Scattered along the routes, researchers have identified the faint outlines of temporary work camps, simple arrangements of post holes and hearths, the ghostly footprints of canvas tents that housed thousands. These were not permanent settlements, but mobile, gritty factories that advanced with the road, leaving behind only charcoal stains and broken tools. Even more poignant are the silent testimonies carved in stone. Occasional tombstones found near major construction sites bear brief, stark inscriptions. They record not the glory of the empire, but simple facts. A soldier from a distant province, a skilled stonecutter, a laborer whose name is now worn smooth. They mark a final resting place far from home, a life given to a project they would never see completed. This was the empire's other, darker engineering, a social machinery of immense scale that mobilized human effort as efficiently as it directed water off a cambered surface. The brilliant logistics that moved armies also moved populations into forced labor. The economic unity that enriched traders was built on a foundation of profound exertion. So as we marvel at the road's endurance, we are faced with a necessary, reflective duality. The same straight line that brought cultural connection and economic vitality was also a line drawn by command, often at a tremendous human cost. When we travel on a modern highway that follows an ancient path, we are riding upon a landscape shaped by two kinds of genius, the brilliance of design and the silent, forgotten effort of countless individuals whose names are lost to the very stones they placed. Their legacy is the road itself, an immortal structure that asks us to remember the mortal hands that built it. The stone under their boots had to be as unyielding as their will. A Roman engineer understood that the road's legendary surface could not be built from just any rock pulled from a hillside. The selection of material was a deliberate act of geological intelligence, a search for the bones of the earth itself. They sought out igneous rocks, stones born from fire like basalt and volcanic tuff. These materials, forged in the immense heat and pressure beneath the Earth's crust, possessed a crystalline structure that was incredibly dense and resistant to wear. In northern provinces like Britannia, where such volcanic stone was rare, they turned to another champion of durability, flint. This smooth, glass-like stone, formed from ancient seabeds, could be knapped into incredibly sharp edges and was nearly impervious to weathering. Where even flint was scarce, their ingenuity shifted. They would manufacture their own paving stones, creating large, brick-like blocks from their Pozzolanic concrete, a testament to their refusal to let geography dictate a lower standard. This reveals a core principle of their adaptability. The Romans did not impose a single, monolithic material from Italy onto the world. Instead, they read the local landscape like a geological manual, identifying the hardest, most durable stone available, and then applying their universal engineering standards to it. This created a continent-wide patchwork of materials: basalt in Italy, granite in Gaul, flint in Britain, all serving the same relentless purpose. To see this in action, picture a quarry established near a new road project. Workers would identify a seam of suitable stone, then use iron wedges and heavy hammers to fracture it along natural lines. Using chisels and adzes, skilled craftsmen would then shape the rough blocks into those distinctive polygonal forms, their ringing strikes echoing as they created the interlocking puzzle pieces of the Summum Dorsum. The finished stones, each weighing hundreds of pounds, would then be loaded onto ox-drawn sledges or carts. Their transport was a logistical feat in itself, often requiring the road builders to construct a rough track just to move the materials to build the permanent one. This cycle, find the toughest stone, shape it with precision, move it with effort, was repeated for thousands of miles. It meant that a legionary marching from the sunny basalt of the Via Appia to the rain-slicked flint of a British highway would experience the same solid, reliable thud under his sandals. The material changed, but the feeling of permanence did not. This flexible yet uncompromising approach asks us to look closer at the old stone walls in our own towns. That peculiar, dark rock in a medieval church foundation or a farmhouse boundary wall might not be local. It could be a fragment of a Roman road, quarried from a distant hill with deliberate intent, a piece of geological strategy still standing guard long after its original purpose faded into the grass. A single weathered stone stands alone in a farmer's field, half sunk into the earth and furrowed by centuries of rain. To a casual glance, it is just another rock, a stubborn obstacle for the plow. But brush away the moss and the stone begins to speak. Carved lines form letters, and those letters spell a name, a number, and a command. This is a millennium, a Roman milestone, and it was far more than a simple marker of distance. It was the empire's voice, etched in granite and planted in the soil of every conquered land. Each one served as a permanent, unblinking eye of the state, making the abstract idea of Rome physically present at the side of a muddy road in Britannia or a dusty path in Syria. The inscription followed a strict, powerful formula. At the top always came the name and full titles of the reigning emperor. This was not a courtesy, it was a declaration of ownership. Then the crucial data, the distance expressed in Roman miles to the nearest major town, and most importantly to the city itself, to Rome. Finally, the name of the senator or governor who commissioned that section of road, claiming credit for this gift of civilization. A traveler, perhaps a merchant from Gaul or a soldier from Egypt, would read this stone and know exactly where he stood in the world, not just geographically, but politically. He was a set number of miles from the heart of power, and that power had signed its name on the landscape. This created the first standardized spatial awareness across a continent. Before the Romans, distance was a local mystery, measured in days of travel or vague landmarks. The milestones imposed a single, universal metric, the Roman mile, turning unknown territory into measured Roman space. It was a psychological grid as much as a physical one, constantly reminding everyone that they were within a system, counted and accounted for. The modern green and white highway signs that tell us we are 100 miles from a capital city are direct descendants of this ancient innovation. We still navigate by the same principle, using numbered markers to tame the wilderness of distance. But the Roman milestone added a layer we have mostly removed, the layer of the ruler's name. It fused geography with allegiance, making every journey a lesson in who was in charge. That silent stone in the field was not giving directions, it was delivering an imperial decree every time a pair of eyes passed over it. But the surveyor's straight line, drawn with celestial confidence, would inevitably meet a challenge that no plumb bob could simply ignore. The line would reach the edge of a roaring river, a deep-cut gorge, or a chasm that seemed to laugh at human ambition. Here, the Roman refusal to deviate transformed from a principle of planning into a spectacle of engineering audacity. The road did not bend, it simply commanded the landscape to open, and where it would not, they built a bridge across the void. These were not mere crossings, they were statements of conquest over geography itself, allowing the relentless logic of the network to flow uninterrupted. To understand their genius, we can look to a structure like the Alcantara Bridge in Spain. It soars over the Tagus River, its 6 massive granite arches forming a graceful, impossibly heavy curve that has stood for nearly 2,000 years. An inscription on it reads bluntly, Pontum perpetui mansorum in secula, I have built a bridge that will last forever. This was not an engineer's hope, It was a declaration of fact, backed by a deep understanding of forces that we still rely on today. The secret lay in taking the same uncompromising principles from the roadbed and projecting them into the air. Just as they dug down to unshakable bedrock for a road's foundation, they would construct bridge piers by driving wooden cofferdams into a riverbed, pumping out the water, and excavating until they hit solid ground, then building the stone pier within that dry enclosure, often using their waterproof pozzolana mortar. The arch itself was a masterpiece of temporary support. Craftsmen would first build a wooden frame called centering that exactly matched the desired curve of the stone arch. They would then carefully lay the wedge-shaped stones, the voussoirs, over this wooden skeleton. The final, central stone, the keystone, was locked into place at the apex. Only then would the wooden frame be removed. The weight of the entire arch and the road above it would then transfer down through the curved stonework, compressing each block tightly against its neighbor and pushing that force outwards and down into the massive piers. The arch did not simply sit there, it actively held itself up through a perfect balance of compression. This allowed them to span distances that seemed impossible, turning a gap in the landscape into just another segment of their straight line. The Pont du Gard in southern France is perhaps the most breathtaking example, a three-tiered aqueduct that also served as a vital road bridge. Its largest arches span over 80 feet, and the entire structure uses stones cut so precisely that no mortar was needed at all, just the immense gravitational lock of one block against another. Every time we drive over a modern concrete overpass, we are benefiting from this ancient Roman translation of force into form. They understood that to conquer the unpassable, you must work with the very weight of the world, letting gravity itself become the glue that holds your ambition together, stone by impossible stone. The empire fell, but the roads refused to follow. This is the great paradox of Roman engineering. With the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, the vast, centralized bureaucracy that funded and directed road maintenance vanished almost overnight. The state couriers stopped running, the way stations fell silent, and the professional surveyors and engineers who knew the road's secrets were gone. Logically, these magnificent highways should have crumbled back into the earth within a generation, reclaimed by forest and swamp. Yet they did not. They endured not as pristine imperial arteries, but as stubborn, indestructible ridges in the landscape. The answer lies in the very nature of their construction. They were not built to be maintained, they were built to survive the absence of their builders. That deep, multi-layered cake of stone and concrete was engineered for passive longevity. The waterproof pozzolanic core could not be penetrated by roots or frost. The cambered shape shed water on its own. The road was, in a very real sense, a machine that had been set in motion and then left to run on its own forever. When medieval settlers, centuries later, needed a reliable path through the wilderness to reach a new village or monastery, they did not build a new road from scratch. They simply followed the highest, driest ground, which was often the raised spine of an old Roman agger, cleared away the saplings and brambles that had grown over the stone, and began using it again. The road required no understanding from its new users, only recognition of its utility. It was a gift from a forgotten civilization that kept on giving, simply by refusing to disappear. This stands in stark contrast to the roads built in the centuries that followed. Medieval and early modern thoroughfares were often little more than dirt tracks, vulnerable to every rainstorm, turning into impassable quagmires each winter. Their maintenance relied entirely on the constant, often neglected, labor of local parishes under systems like corvée or forced labor. Without a deep, self-draining foundation, they were inherently fragile. The Roman road, meanwhile, slept like a stone serpent beneath the soil, waiting to be rediscovered by every new age. This leads us to a profound reflection on intention and legacy. The Roman engineers designed these roads for an eternal empire, a political entity they believed would last for all time. That political dream dissolved into history. Yet, in a magnificent twist, the physical tool they built to serve that dream achieved the eternity its masters could not. The road's form outlived its political purpose by well over 1,000 years, becoming a servant to kingdoms, republics, and nations that the original builders could never have imagined. It makes you wonder, in our own era of rapid innovation and planned obsolescence, what we are building today that might quietly outlast every one of our own grandest ambitions. A weary pilgrim in the 11th century would have known nothing of legionary sandals or imperial messengers. His world was one of faith, penance, and a desperate hope for healing. Yet when he set out from his village in northern France, bound for the distant shrine of St. James at Santiago de Compostela in Spain, his feet found their way onto a road he did not build. The path was firm, raised slightly above the soggy fields, and it ran with a stubborn directness toward the horizon. He was walking a Roman highway, now called the Via Appia, one of the major branches of the great pilgrimage network. This was not a coincidence, but a necessity. In a fractured, post-Roman world where local lords could barely maintain a mile of track, the only reliable long-distance routes were the indestructible ones left behind by a vanished empire. The pilgrim did not know he was following a military supply line from Lyon to the Atlantic coast. He only knew that this Chemin, this way, was passable in all seasons, a stone ribbon guiding him through wilderness and bandit country toward his sacred goal. The road's original purpose, moving legions to conquer Gaul, had been utterly forgotten. Its new purpose, moving souls toward redemption, was now its defining truth. This transformation from legionary path to pilgrim's way is one of history's great acts of recycling, where infrastructure built for earthly power was repurposed for spiritual journey, permanently stitching the Roman grid into the sacred map of Europe. Where pilgrims walked, communities took root. The ancient mansions, the Roman way stations built a day's march apart, found a second life. Monastic orders, seeing the steady flow of devoted travelers, established abbeys and hospices at these exact intervals, offering shelter, food, and medical care. The Abbey of Roncesvalles in the Pyrenees, a critical refuge on the Camino de Santiago, sits astride an old Roman pass. In England, the route from Winchester to Canterbury, immortalized by Chaucer's tales, followed the Roman road known as Stone Street for much of its length. At these stopping points, markets naturally developed to serve the travelers. A blacksmith would set up to repair cartwheels and shoe horses. A baker would sell his loaves. A farmer would bring his surplus. Over decades, these clusters of commerce hardened into villages, then towns. The rhythmic spacing of Roman military logistics had, centuries later, dictated the rhythm of spiritual travel, which in turn planted the seeds of urban life. Many of the charming market towns that dot the European countryside today, with their central high streets and ancient churches, are not medieval accidents. They are the direct descendants of a Roman engineer's calculation for where a tired soldier or 1,000 years later, a tired pilgrim would need to rest. This embedding of the Roman road into the religious geography had a profound effect on the spiritual experience itself. The journey became as important as the destination. The very physicality of the road, its relentless straightness, its tangible, unchanging presence lent a sense of timeless ritual to the pilgrimage. Walking the same stones that countless others had walked for both sacred and secular purposes created a living connection across centuries. The road itself became a kind of linear cathedral, with its milestones turned into prayer markers and its enduring form a testament to a different kind of permanence. The Via Francigena, the great route from Canterbury to Rome, is perhaps the ultimate example. It was not a single road, but a corridor of several Roman highways linked together, connecting the heart of English Christianity to the heart of the Catholic world. To travel, it was to walk through the skeleton of the old empire in pursuit of a new kind of grace. So the landscape of faith in Europe was, quite literally, paved by pagan engineers. A network built for control and conquest became the vessel for humility and devotion. It asks a quiet question about the objects we build today. What will our steel and concrete channels carry 1,000 years from now, when our own intentions are dust, and will they guide future generations toward something we could never have envisioned? Open a road atlas of Europe from any era after the Empire, and you will find a ghost in the grid. The mapmakers of the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and even the early modern period faced a continent shrouded in dense forest and political fragmentation. How does one chart a reliable course through such uncertainty? Their solution was to anchor their new maps to the most permanent features they could find, the unyielding stone bones of a lost civilization. When a medieval cartographer set out to draw the route from London to Canterbury, he did not survey a new path through the Kentish woods. He simply drew a line along the high, dry ridge of Watling Street, the Roman road he could see and walk upon. That line on parchment, copied and recopied over centuries, hardened from a description into an instruction. It told generations of travelers and later engineers that this was the way. This is why the modern A2 road, the roaring motorway from London to the Channel ports, follows the same relentless trajectory today. It is not a coincidence of modern planning. It is the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old cartographic echo. The Roman road network became the continent's first and most enduring set of surveyors' benchmarks, the fixed points from which all other distances and directions were measured. In Germany, the Bundesstraße 9, a vital north-south artery, shadows the path of the Via Claudia Augusta, the ancient Roman highway across the Alps. In France, the route from Lyon to the Mediterranean clings to the line of the old Via Domitia. These overlaps are not occasional, they are systemic. The Roman road provided the one thing every mapmaker craves, an undeniable truth on the ground, a line that could not be argued with because it was made of stone. This gave later civilizations a tremendous advantage, a pre-drawn skeleton upon which to build the muscle and flesh of their own transport networks. There was no need to rediscover the optimal pass through a mountain range or the most stable ford across a wide river. The Romans had already done the work, and their solution was still physically present, waiting to be reused. So the act of mapmaking, an exercise in defining a new world, became an act of tracing an old one. Each time a cartographer inked that straight line onto vellum, he was unconsciously passing down a Roman decision, cementing it into the geographical consciousness of Europe. The roads did not just shape the land, they shaped our very perception of it, dictating what we considered a logical route long after the logic of the legion had been forgotten. The lines on our modern maps, then, are often palimpsests. Beneath the bold colors of contemporary highways, if you look with a historical eye, you can still see the faint, unwavering graphite trace of the Agrimensor's plumb line, a ghost in the machine of modern travel, forever guiding us home along the oldest paths. A road can be a bridge, but it can also be a wall. The Roman genius for connection had its necessary counterpart, the art of the definitive limit. In the misty northern forests of Germania and across the windswept hills of Britannia, the empire reached its geographical breaking point. Here, the endless connecting lines of the road network culminated in something extraordinary, a linear city of military control designed not to link but to separate. Systems like the Limes Germanicus, a fortified frontier zone stretching over 300 miles, and the iconic stone scar of Hadrian's Wall were not mere barriers. They were the ultimate expression of the Roman road, engineered to be an impassable border with a highway running along its spine. The wall itself was a sophisticated piece of infrastructure. Behind its intimidating northern face ran a wide, meticulously maintained service road, the Via Principalis. This road allowed patrols to move swiftly along the entire length of the frontier, connecting the forts, mile castles, and watchtowers that were spaced at precise, predictable intervals, much like the way stations on any imperial highway. Supply wagons could roll along this road to feed and equip the garrisons, and messengers could gallop with news of any breach. The wall was not a dead end, it was a controlled corridor, a road that existed solely to monitor and enforce a line in the earth. This linear infrastructure made the frontier a living, breathing membrane, not a static fence. It allowed Rome to project power efficiently to the very edge of its world, to define with shocking clarity where civilization, as they saw it, ended and the unknown began. The psychological impact of such a permanent, engineered divide cannot be overstated. For the tribes to the north, it was a daily, stone reminder of an empire that had decided to build a limit rather than conquer beyond it. For those living to the south, it created a sense of a secured zone, a world ordered and protected by Roman engineering. The road along the wall did not just serve the soldiers, it actively created the frontier as a permanent reality. And when the legions finally left and the empire receded, that reality did not vanish. The physical presence of the wall and the military road that defined its logic left a ghostly template on the land. In northern England, the path of Hadrian's Wall, running from coast to coast, did not fade from memory or use. For centuries, it served as a convenient, raised boundary marker for local kingdoms and parishes. Its enduring stone foundation made it a natural line of division in disputes over grazing land or territory. Over time, this local recognition of the wall as a border hardened into something far more significant. When the modern border between England and Scotland was formally negotiated and mapped in later centuries, diplomats and surveyors did not draw a line through trackless wilderness. They looked to the most obvious, ancient, and unambiguous feature on the landscape, the ruins of the Roman frontier. While the border does not follow the wall exactly, its eastern and central sections are profoundly influenced by it, using the wall's corridor as a guiding template. The Roman decision of where to stop building their world effectively helped decide where a future nation would begin. This pattern repeats across Europe. The Limes Germanicus, a complex of ditches, palisades, forts, and roads, sketched a deep impression across Central Europe. While not a solid wall, its zone of control established a clear military and cultural threshold that influenced the later boundaries of German principalities and subtly the shape of modern states. The secret here is profound. Infrastructure built for temporary military control can, through sheer physical persistence, fossilize into a permanent political division. The road meant for patrols becomes the path for border guards, and the line drawn for an empire's security becomes the inherited property of the kingdoms that follow. It asks us to look at any modern map with a deeper historical eye. How many of the straight lines separating countries or provinces are not accidents of geography or modern treaties, but the long, slow echo of an ancient engineer's decision about where to lay his final stone and build a road to watch over it forever. The true test of any theory is what lies beneath the surface. For all our maps and ancient texts, the most compelling evidence for the Roman road's layered secret is not found in a library, but in a trench, a deep slice cut through the skin of the earth. Modern archaeology provides the ultimate cross-section, a window into the meticulous process that transformed a line on a map into a monument in the ground. Picture a dig site in the English countryside, where a team works with brushes and trowels, carefully peeling back the centuries to expose a vertical face of compacted history. What they reveal is not a homogeneous mass of dirt, but a precise, colorful stratification, a layer cake of human intention. At the very bottom, resting on the natural clay subsoil, lies the statumen, a jumble of large, rounded cobbles stained dark by minerals and time. Above it, a distinct band of orange and gray, the rudus layer, appears almost like a slab of coarse concrete, its pozzolanic cement still binding the aggregate together after 2,000 years. Then a thinner, lighter stratum of fine gravel and sand, the nucleus, and finally, at the very top, the ghostly imprint of the missing Summum Dorsum, the paving stones long since robbed for later buildings. Seeing these layers side by side transforms abstract engineering terms into tangible, physical reality. It is the difference between reading a recipe and tasting the finished dish. Each stratum tells a story of the construction day. The tool marks on a foundational stone, the angle of a chisel strike, reveal whether it was shaped at the quarry or fitted on site. A tiny fragment of Samian-ware pottery, a glossy red dish from Gaul, found mixed into the rudus layer, is more than trash. It is a chronological anchor, giving archaeologists a firm date for when that section of road was built. Even the absence of the top layer speaks volumes, showing how medieval builders viewed the Roman road as a convenient quarry for ready-made stone. But perhaps the most human connection comes from a different kind of mark entirely. In the hardened surface of the nucleus, or sometimes preserved in a patch of the original stone paving, you can find them, the rudii. These are not casual scratches, but deep, parallel grooves worn into the road by countless iron-rimmed cartwheels following the exact same path, year after year, century after century. Measuring the width between these ruts often matches the standard Roman gauge for axles, a silent testament to the uniformity of imperial logistics. They are the physical echo of traffic, a record of journeys taken, goods delivered, and lives lived along this stone ribbon. This stratified evidence does something remarkable. It turns the road from a surface we travel on into a deep, complex artifact we can read. Each layer is a page in a geological manuscript, and archaeology is the painstaking work of translation, revealing not just how it was built, but how it was used, maintained, and ultimately how it was remembered. The road did not simply vanish. It was incrementally buried by the slow accumulation of soil, leaves, and human forgetfulness, waiting in the dark for someone to brush the earth away and ask it to tell its story again. The stones themselves became accidental gardeners. In their quest to build the ultimate impervious surface, Roman engineers created something entirely unexpected, a new kind of wilderness corridor. Every roadbed, with its deep, free-draining foundation and raised, cambered spine, acted like a man-made desert ridge running for miles through the landscape. While the surrounding lowlands might be damp, shaded, and rich with typical forest flora, the road itself offered a completely different habitat, a long, narrow island of sun-baked, well-drained soil. This was an unintended act of environmental engineering. The road did not just cut through ecosystems, it actively generated a new one. Over time, a specialized community of life would colonize this unique strip. Hardy, drought-tolerant plants that thrived in poor, gravelly soil and full sun found a perfect home along the Agger. Seeds from Mediterranean herbs, perhaps carried in the fodder of military pack animals or the supplies of merchants, could establish themselves in these dry, warm microclimates far to the north of their native range. Insects adapted to open, rocky ground would follow, and with them, the birds and small mammals that fed on them. The Roman road became a linear nature reserve, a sunlit highway for species that would otherwise be confined to cliffs, outcrops, or sandy heaths. Today, botanists walking along the grassy tracks of long-abandoned Roman roads in northern Europe sometimes note curious patterns. Certain wildflowers, like the viper's bugloss with its vibrant blue spikes, or patches of thyme and other aromatic herbs, seem to trace the ghostly lines of the old foundations with uncanny precision. These are not random distributions, they are living maps, a floral echo of the stone skeleton beneath the turf. The road, designed to repel water and bear immense weight, inadvertently wrote its signature in the root systems of resilient plants, creating ecological fingerprints that have lasted 2 millennia. This shifts our perspective in a profound way. We often think of ancient construction as a brutal subtraction from nature, a clearing and a conquest. But the Roman road demonstrates that human intervention can also be a complex addition, a catalyst for new ecological relationships. The engineers were not just moving armies, they were, without knowing it, drafting a blueprint for a specialized linear garden that would outlive their empire and bloom quietly for centuries, a legacy written not in stone but in petals and roots. The logic of the road did not end at a city's gates, it gave birth to the city itself. The most profound legacy of these highways is not merely the routes between places, but the creation of the places we inhabit. Countless modern European capitals and cultural centers owe their very existence and their internal street grid to a Roman surveyor's decision about where two straight lines should cross. Take the city of Paris. Before it was a global capital of art and fashion, it was Lutetia, a modest Gallo-Roman town on an island in the Seine. Its importance was not born from grandeur but from geography. It sat at a critical convergence, a point where the river, a natural highway, was crossed by a major Roman road running north to south. This was not a coincidence of settlement, it was a deliberate act of strategic placement. The Romans established their forum, their administrative and commercial heart, on the higher ground of the left bank, and from this center they imposed their signature order. They laid out two primary thoroughfares that would define the town for millennia: the Cardo, the main north-south axis, and the Decumanus, the main east-west axis, intersected at right angles, creating a cross that oriented the entire settlement to the compass points. This was the Roman urban blueprint, a template of control and efficiency applied from York to Damascus. When the Roman Empire receded, Lutetia shrank, but its stone bones remained. The medieval city that grew back centuries later did not erase this foundational grid. Instead, it grew within its constraints and along its lines. The winding lanes of the medieval Latin Quarter did not spring from chaos. They were infill, a dense web of smaller paths that developed between the enduring, wide routes of the old Roman streets. The modern Rue Saint-Jacques, which climbs the hill toward the Sorbonne, follows the precise trajectory of the ancient Cardo. The Boulevard Saint-Michel traces another key Roman axis. The entire layout of the city's historic core, with its seemingly organic medieval twist, is a direct echo of that original, rigid cross. The Roman road engineers, by simply drawing their lines to meet at a defensible river crossing, had unknowingly drafted the first street map of a future global capital. This pattern repeats across the continent. London's financial district, the City, sits atop the Roman Londinium, and the alignment of its modern streets like Cheapside and Lombard Street still subtly follows the Roman grid established 2,000 years ago. In Cologne, the cathedral sits precisely where the Roman Cardo and Decumanus met, the spiritual heart of the city growing from its original civic heart. The initial road network acted as a kind of urban DNA, a genetic code for city planning that every subsequent era inherited and built upon. It determined where the market square would be, where the main church would rise, and which routes would become the major commercial arteries. So when you walk through the charming, crooked streets of an old European city center, you are not just walking through medieval history. You are navigating a landscape whose deepest logic was set in stone by military surveyors, a permanent urban fingerprint left by the roads that first made the city possible. Centuries of silence lay over the old stones. Then, a new kind of mind began to look at them, not as useful paths or convenient quarries, but as puzzles to be solved. In the flourishing cities of the Renaissance, a profound shift was occurring. Scholars, artists, and engineers turned their gaze backward, seeking wisdom in the classical world they saw as a lost golden age. They did not just admire Roman statues and read recovered texts by Vitruvius. They got their hands dirty, examining the broken aqueducts and exposed roadbeds that littered the Italian countryside. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci, with his insatiable curiosity for how things worked, meticulously sketched the stratified layers of ancient pavement in his notebooks. He was not merely drawing ruins, he was conducting a forensic investigation. He measured the camber of the surface, noted the depth of the foundations, and puzzled over the composition of the mortar that still held fast. For these Renaissance thinkers, the Roman road was a silent teacher, a masterclass in applied physics and material science that had been left unattended for 1,000 years. Their fascination was not nostalgic, it was urgently practical. The roads of their own time were notoriously terrible, muddy quagmires that stifled trade and travel. In the Roman skeleton, they saw a blueprint for a better future. This intellectual revival created a direct bridge across the so-called Dark Ages, reconnecting modern engineering inquiry with ancient empirical knowledge. The principles they deduced from observation, the necessity of a deep foundation, the importance of drainage, the value of durable materials, began to inform new projects. When Pope Sixtus V embarked on ambitious urban renewal in Rome in the late 16th century, he explicitly aimed to restore the city's ancient grandeur, which included improving its thoroughfares based on Roman models. This was more than imitation, it was a translation of recovered secrets into a new age. The reflective question this poses is quietly profound for our own era of innovation. How much of what we consider modern civil engineering wisdom, the very basics of load-bearing foundations, waterproof substrates, and graded surfaces, is not our invention at all, but a conscious or unconscious rediscovery of principles perfected 2 millennia ago. The Renaissance engineers established an unbroken intellectual lineage, proving that the most enduring breakthroughs are not those we invent in isolation, but those we are wise enough to recognize and learn from, even when the teachers have been gone for 1,000 years. Steam and iron did not erase the old lines, they simply gave them a new purpose. When the Industrial Revolution demanded a network of railways to move coal, goods, and people at unprecedented speeds, the engineers of the 19th century faced a monumental surveying challenge. They needed routes that were as straight as possible to maintain locomotive efficiency, with stable, well-drained foundations to support the immense weight of trains. As they scanned the landscape for the optimal path, their eyes were inevitably drawn to the same raised, linear ridges that had guided every traveler since the empire fell. The Roman road, with its engineered agger, presented a ready-made solution. Its deep stone core had settled for over 1,000 years into absolute stability. Its cambered shape guaranteed perfect drainage, protecting the track bed from the waterlogging that could warp rails and destabilize embankments. Its relentless straightness offered the ideal alignment for a steam engine's run. In many cases, it was faster, cheaper, and more logical to lay tracks directly atop the ancient roadbed than to carve an entirely new route through unpredictable terrain. Across Britain, this silent partnership is etched into the rail map. The main railway line from London to York, for instance, famously shadows the course of the ancient Roman Ermine Street for long stretches. Engineers laying the Great North Road Railway simply used the venerable highway's foundation as their own, trusting the Roman assessment of the land more than any contemporary survey. In the Midlands, sections of the famous Watling Street, the Roman road from London to Wroxeter, were repurposed for early rail lines, their stone bones now carrying iron horses. The logic was a perfect echo across the centuries. Both Roman and Victorian engineers sought the same things: a direct line, a dry foundation, and a resistance to the settling that destroys infrastructure. The Roman road was not a relic to be cleared away. It was a geological gift, a pre-approved blueprint from the finest civil engineers in history. This seamless transition from cart path to rail bed asks a quiet question about the nature of true innovation. Is it always about inventing something entirely new, or is it sometimes about recognizing the enduring genius already embedded in the landscape and finding a new application for its timeless principles? The steam train, that symbol of modern power, often drew its first breath while rolling along a road built for sandals and chariots. A modern civil engineer, clipboard in hand, stands at the edge of an excavated section of the Via Appia. Her eyes are not those of a tourist but of a professional peer evaluating a 2,000-year-old project. She sees, with immediate recognition, the layered profile in the trench wall. That thick bed of packed stones at the bottom she would call the sub-base, the critical layer that distributes load and provides drainage. The solid, concrete-like core above it is what her manuals term the base course, the structural spine of the pavement. The subtle, arched curve of the roadbed itself is the camber, a design her team still calculates into every highway plan to shed rainwater. She is not looking at a relic, she is reading a familiar specification sheet, written in stone and soil instead of digital code. The engineer might kneel, running a hand over the tight joints between the basalt blocks. The precision is humbling. In a recent interview, a senior infrastructure specialist put it plainly. We spend millions on computer modeling to achieve what they accomplished with geometry and relentless quality control. Their understanding of load transfer and hydrology was fundamentally correct. The dialogue happening in her mind is not one of superiority, but of kinship across centuries. The core challenges are identical: how to keep water out, how to spread weight down to stable ground, how to choose materials that fight time. Her modern toolkit includes geotextile fabrics, polymer-modified asphalts, and massive steel-reinforced concrete. Theirs included volcanic ash, hand-shaped stone, and a deep, uncompromising trench. The scale is different, the machinery unrecognizable, but the foundational wisdom is parallel. We still seek the unshakable substrate. We still design for the relentless enemy of water, and we still strive for a surface that can bear the rhythm of countless journeys. The key divergence is not in principle, but in pace and power. Where a legion of soldiers might take a season to build a mile of road, a modern crew with excavators and pavers can complete it in days. Yet this very speed invites a reflective pause. Our materials are often designed for a lifespan of decades under exponentially heavier loads, a testament to our own engineering. But when we discover a Roman road that remains intact after 100 generations, it asks a quiet, persistent question of our own work. What in our built environment today is being constructed with that same intention of passive permanence, designed to outlive its creators with such silent, stubborn grace? A road is more than a path for feet and wheels, it is a stage for the human story. Long after the last legion marched, the Roman highway continued its journey, this time into the realm of art, literature, and whispered legend. It ceased to be merely a physical object and became a powerful symbol, woven into the cultural memory of a continent. In Geoffrey Chaucer's 14th-century masterpiece, The Canterbury Tales, the entire narrative unfolds because of a road. A group of pilgrims meet by chance at the Tabard Inn in Southwark, and their route to the shrine of Thomas Becket in Canterbury is the ancient Roman road known as Stone Street. The road itself becomes the frame for the story, a linear theatre where characters from all walks of medieval life, the knight, the miller, the wife of Bath, are forced into proximity, their tales spinning out with the turning of the wheels. Chaucer did not choose this road for its scenery, but for its inevitability. It was the only logical way to travel, the same undeniable fact that had guided travelers for over 1,000 years. His work immortalizes not just the pilgrims, but the road that carried them, cementing its role as a conduit for human drama and social tapestry. Centuries later, as the Romantic movement looked upon the ruins of antiquity with a sense of awe and melancholy, the broken Roman road became a favorite subject for painters and poets. In their canvases, these overgrown fragments, often cutting through a wild, sublime landscape, were no longer feats of engineering. They were poignant symbols of transience, of mighty empires humbled by time. A lone traveler on such a road, dwarfed by crumbling arches and encroaching nature, evoked a powerful emotional truth. The road represented a bridge between the present and a lost, grander past, a silent reminder that all human endeavors, no matter how solidly built, eventually return to the earth. This artistic vision transformed the road from infrastructure into philosophy, a stone line prompting reflection on ambition, legacy, and the slow, patient work of decay. Yet in the local folklore of the countryside, a different, more mysterious transformation occurred. Across Europe, particularly in Britain, certain unnaturally straight, old roads gained names like the Devil's Highway or the Ferry Path. This was not a celebration of Roman order, but a superstitious reaction to it. To medieval and early modern rural communities, the explanation for such a perfectly straight, raised causeway that ignored hills and streams could not be human. It must be the work of a supernatural force, a devil laying a claim across the land, or a road for otherworldly beings. These stories served a practical, protective purpose, often discouraging people from traveling these lonely, often perilous routes at night. But they also reveal how the road's otherworldly perfection, its refusal to conform to nature, had etched itself into the collective psyche. The rational geometry of the empire had been reinterpreted through the lens of magic and fear, becoming part of a different kind of map, one charted by legend and cautionary tale. In this way, the Roman road achieved a unique kind of immortality. It lived on not only in stone, but in verse, on canvas, and in fireside stories. It became a metaphor for life's journey in literature, a memento mori in art, and a threshold to the unknown in folklore. This cultural embedding is perhaps its most subtle yet profound shaping force. The roads dictated where stories could be set. They inspired reflections on the rise and fall of civilizations, and they populated the imagination with spectral travelers. They taught generations to see a straight line in the landscape and feel not just the presence of history, but the stirrings of narrative, mystery, and poetic truth. The engineer's line had become the storyteller's thread, connecting us not just to places, but to the timeless human need to find meaning in the paths we walk. A ghost road emerges from beneath a dense English forest. For centuries it was hidden, its low stone spine buried under centuries of leaf litter and soil, invisible to anyone walking the ground above. Then a plane flew overhead, emitting millions of invisible laser pulses. This is LIDAR, light detection and ranging, and it is performing a kind of digital resurrection, stripping away the veil of time and vegetation to reveal the empire's hidden handwriting. The technology works by measuring the precise time it takes for each laser pulse to bounce back from the ground. By filtering out the returns from trees and buildings, software can create a breathtakingly accurate three-dimensional map of the bare earth. On these maps, the subtle, raised ridge of a Roman agger, only a foot or two high, appears as a clear, straight line cutting across the digital landscape. It is archaeology without a shovel, revealing highways that have been sleeping for 1,500 years. In the forests of Germania or the moors of northern England, researchers are now discovering roads that do not appear on any historical map, extending the known network by dozens, sometimes hundreds of miles. The secret these lasers whisper is startling. We are now discovering more about the Roman transportation system than anyone has known since the empire itself collapsed. Each new line on the digital map forces us to redraw our understanding of Roman economic reach, military ambition, and territorial control. What was once considered remote wilderness is now shown to have been meticulously connected, a testament to an organizational will we are only beginning to fully comprehend. But the view from space adds another layer to this digital excavation. multispectral satellite imagery can detect subtle differences in soil moisture and plant health. A buried Roman road with its compacted stone foundation affects how water drains and how plants grow above it. Crops planted over the roadbed may be slightly stunted, or grass may grow a different shade of green in a summer drought. From orbit, these minute variations coalesce into faint, straight lines across farmers' fields, ghostly crop marks that trace the exact path of a vanished highway. Ground-penetrating radar completes the picture, sending radio waves into the earth and building a cross-sectional image of the layered roadbed without breaking the surface. Together, these tools are compiling a living atlas of a lost network. The most stunning revelations are the before and after images. A satellite photo shows a featureless stretch of woodland. The LIDAR processed image of the same area reveals the crisp geometry of a road junction, complete with the faint rectangles of long-vanished waystations. It is a landscape suddenly imprinted with ancient intention, a hidden order snapped into clarity. This digital renaissance forces a profound shift in perspective. For generations, we studied Roman roads by walking the ones we could see. Now we are mapping the ones we cannot, proving that the empire's imprint on the European landscape is deeper, wider, and more intricate than any historian dared to speculate. Every new line revealed is a silent correction to our historical maps, a reminder that the past is not always buried. Sometimes it is simply waiting for the right light to be seen. Their stone logic offers a quiet rebuke to our age of asphalt and urgency. In a world grappling with climate extremes and the constant, costly cycle of repairing crumbling roads, the 2,000-year-old highway presents itself not as a relic, but as a radical blueprint for sustainability. The Roman model was built on a simple, profound principle that we have largely abandoned, the principle of passive permanence. They engineered not for minimum viable cost, but for maximum possible lifespan, understanding that the most sustainable material is the one you never have to replace. Every aspect of their design, from the deep trench that locked the road to the continent's bedrock to the volcanic concrete heart that shrugged off water, was an investment in a future they would never see. This philosophy of over-engineering for longevity stands in stark contrast to the disposable nature of much modern infrastructure, where thin layers of asphalt are laid over unstable ground, destined to crack and rut under stress and weather, requiring constant, energy-intensive resurfacing every few decades. The Roman road asks a difficult, reflective question of our own priorities. Are we building a landscape for the future, or merely patching one for the present? Their sustainability was deeply rooted in a practice we now call local sourcing. Roman engineers became masters of reading the geological language of a new province. They did not ship granite from Italy to Britain. They identified the hardest local stone, whether it was flint from the chalk downs or millstone grit from the northern moors, and applied their universal engineering standards to it. This drastically reduced the carbon cost of transportation, a concept they would not have named but intuitively understood as logistical efficiency. More importantly, it created infrastructure that was made from the land itself, ensuring compatibility and resilience. Their drainage was entirely passive, relying on the precise camber of the surface and the deep side ditches to manage water without pumps, filters, or any moving parts at all. The system required no external energy, only the intelligent direction of gravity, and it worked flawlessly for centuries after its creators were gone. Compare this to the complex, vulnerable drainage systems of modern highways, with their culverts that clog and pumps that fail, requiring constant maintenance and intervention. The Roman approach was elegantly simple: let the design do the work forever. This invites a challenging thought experiment for our own time. What if we applied the Roman standard of centuries to our public works? It would necessitate a fundamental shift. valuing long-term resilience over short-term budget cycles. It would mean investing more initially in deeper foundations, in more durable, locally sourced materials, and in designs that manage environmental forces passively. The initial cost would be higher, but the total cost over 500 years would be infinitesimal compared to the repeated expense of rebuilding the same road 25 times. The Roman road did not have a maintenance department. It was its own maintenance department, engineered to maintain itself. This is not a call to return to quarrying basalt blocks by hand, but to reclaim the underlying intention, the ambition to build things that become heirlooms for civilization rather than expenses for the next generation. Our modern materials like advanced polymers and fiber-reinforced concrete could, in theory, achieve even greater longevity if deployed with that centuries-long vision. The roads outside our windows, however, rarely reflect that ambition. They are often political timelines paved in asphalt, meant to last just long enough to see the next administration. So as we walk on modern pavement or drive on highways that follow those ancient lines, we are traveling between two philosophies of time, one built for the fleeting now, the other for the enduring forever. The ghost in the grid is more than a historical curiosity. It is a silent teacher. It demonstrates that true sustainability is not about gentle impact, but about profound endurance, about building so well that the very idea of replacement becomes obsolete. The legacy of the Roman road is not merely in the stones we can see, but in the question it leaves hanging in the air for our engineers, our planners, and our society. Will anything we build today remain to guide a traveler 2,000 years from now? Or will our greatest monuments to progress be remembered only as layers in a future archaeologist's trench, brief interruptions in the soil? Before the next repair begins, from a dangling plumb bob to a laser pulse from space, the story of these roads is a map of human ingenuity itself. We have walked the layers from the deep trench of the Fossae to the cambered crown of the Summum Dorsum, uncovering a truth more compelling than any myth. Their power was not supernatural but supremely rational, a marriage of volcanic ash and celestial geometry, of local stone and imperial will. These highways were the first continent-wide operating system, a physical code that booted up civilizations long after Rome itself had shut down. They dictated where markets would thrive, where cathedrals would rise, and where nations would one day draw their lines. So the next time your tires hum on a motorway or your boots crunch on a gravel farm track, pause for a moment. Feel the depth beneath you. You are not just moving from one point to another, you are traveling across a palimpsest of time, tracing a decision made by an engineer whose name is lost to history, but whose logic is written permanently into the journey of a continent. The ultimate secret, then, was not in the stone itself, but in the ambition. They built with the humility to learn from the land and the audacity to shape it for millennia. They built not for an empire, but for the future, for us. If this journey has shifted your view of the landscape outside your window, we would love to hear how in the comments below. Subscribe to join us as we continue to uncover the hidden layers of history, one enduring mystery at a time.